Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed members and speakers of the panel discussion, or participants of the 11th Global Baku Forum. Very warm welcome to all of you. After lunch, panel discussions are not the easiest one. It's hard to gather as we have seen it now, but I can promise you that this session will be both captivating and intellectually reinvigorating. We will be dealing, after all, with issues that capture our imagination these days: war and peace, return of real politics, and then we have an excellent lineup of the speakers. So please have a seat, and then let's start our discussions. I won't do any long introduction. We are really pressed with time, but I have to say, as somebody that comes from the region where omnipresence of realpolitik has always been keenly felt, we always had a feeling that it was always part of a discourse after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Narrative or foreign policy optics might have changed, but realpolitik was always there, as much as we could have felt with the way we had to be confronted with major decisions that affected our fate and our future as small or big nations in the region. But now we live in the world of shifting global power dynamics, geopolitical competition of a kind that revived even talks of the global wars. And in this case, realpolitik really became talk of the town, yet again. So what we will be discussing today will go to the core of issues that trouble so many around the world. How the realpolitik, if it really has a comeback in a more accepted way, affects the current geopolitics, foreign relations, war and peace. And we will discuss so many very important issues throughout the Global Baku Forum. And among those will be challenges that are global in nature, require global efforts, cooperation. Is realpolitik really field for modern era type of the challenges if it becomes core of how the nations make decisions? And what is the role for international organizations to be part of their architecture? So I'll be very brief with rules of the game. Every speaker knows that, but we'll have a special address, and then we'll have first round of interventions, and I hope we'll have a chance to have the second round of interventions where you could pick up on some of the issues that your fellow panel members would mention, or you would want to expand and build a bit more. But in the meantime, would really welcome, how you prefer, on the podium or here as well, Mrs. Zeljka Cvijanovic, member of the Presidency, Serb Presidency of the Bosnia Herzegovina.
Does this work? Yes. Thank you. I'm going to make a little joke now. It's not easy to have a panel after lunch, but it's worse to have it without lunch. So, okay, I think it will be okay. Thank you, esteemed excellencies, dear friends and colleagues. Let me first and once again thank our hosts for the invitation and the opportunity to address this distinguished gathering. I'm honored to share my insights on this highly significant matter. There are many elements we need to take into consideration as we explore the theme of the panel. The first one implies the theory of the return of realpolitik to international relations and global security. Here we have to bear in mind that realpolitik, by definition, views international relations primarily through the lens of hard power, predominantly military and subsequently economic strength. It is seen as a fundamental instrument for attaining projected interests and goals, offering a rather bare worldview stripped of deeper value elements except those associated with preserving stability and the power of the state itself. Despite the fact that some new developments, such as, for instance, the conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza, or the new geopolitical circumstances, warn us, as suggested by the title of this panel, of the return of realpolitik, I believe that realpolitik and its fundamental categories are constantly present in international political and security arena, where only the intensity of their manifestation varies from phase to phase in specific historical epochs. And we who come from the Western Balkan countries, which do not long ago witnessed war and destruction, and who still live with a high-level interference and involvement of certain foreign actors in our domestic issues, are always aware that it takes very little for realpolitik to reveal its ugliest face, where force and power become the sole tool in political processes and relations. This leads us to another also relevant issue, which is to understand the circumstances in which realpolitik manifests as the dominant behavioral metrics, but also to understand where our shared responsibility lies when it comes to the current state of affairs in international relations. It is obvious that realpolitik and its essence come to the forefront primarily when the key instruments designed to cushion the impulses originating from the categories of force and power in international relations fail. Unfortunately, what we can see nowadays is a complete functional atrophy of multilateral international structures. In other words, their failure in fulfilling their main mission is so evident that we almost do not believe anymore in their capacity to bridge the gaps and help the opposed sides to reach agreements or to assist the global community in identifying a common denominator on all relevant or burdening issues in international relations. We also live in a world marked by profound distrust among key global actors, their direct struggle for more and more power, deep divisions and taking sides in conflicts and interstate relations that could and should have been avoided. Therefore, responsibility for the current state of international relations lies with all of us, primarily those who, with their capacities and resources, predominantly shape not only the current global environment, but also near and distant global future. Those who believe that realpolitik instruments represent the right way to achieve proclaimed interests and goals neglect the fact that realpolitik by its nature is not only destructive but also self-destructive, and that it cannot bring stability and prosperity in the long run. I'm convinced that it is high time for all of us to wake up and to start thinking in a serious and responsible manner of how to revive the collapse in international structures starting from the United Nations, and how to adapt them to the new circumstances and expectations of those who genuinely promote peace and stability. Of course, it would sound too ambitious to say that we expect or demand from the big players to reduce their appetites and ambitions, but we can still insist on all of us being gathered in an effort to renew mutual trust and to ensure common rules of the game that everyone would equally respect, regardless of their strength and regardless of their power. Esteemed Excellencies, paradoxically, despite the overall civilizational, technological, scientific, and social development, today's world is facing the most complex security challenges in its history. In a globalized world based on integration and interdependence, each and every one of us will suffer the consequences of our negative individual or collective choices and behaviors. Therefore, with a certain concern for future developments, we should appeal to all, especially to key players on the international scene, to replace realpolitik instruments with the negotiating process and diplomatic means. Otherwise, the world will end up in deeper divisions and uncertainties, and I am confident that this is what we want to avoid, and that this forum firmly stands for a just and a more peaceful world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Well, before giving the floor to you, Minister Bayramov, I just wanted to highlight once again from my side that Azerbaijan represents a remarkable example, really, of a country that manages very successfully this maneuvering in this very complex environment full with so many rivalries, and then shifts in major power competitions, and at the same time being apt not only to serve the interests of its own people and then strategic interests, but then being a contributor to the global efforts, dealing with the global challenges of a kind that keep many awake during the night when it comes to the future of the planet. And it's palpable how much success in this direction Azerbaijan managed to achieve. So we'll try to get a little bit of information of secrets, perhaps, that you use in your vision in this direction. And then to start with your view How do you see now this resurgence of real, or comeback of realpolitik plays out internationally? Do you see that it already has an impact of a kind that is palpable, and it's not just change of a narrative, but it's real? And then what it takes for international community to mitigate some of the negative impacts that it might bring together with its comeback, so that we are able to deal with global challenges with collective efforts rather than we're just driven by national interest only.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank for this opportunity the NGIC to address such a distinguished panel and such a distinguished audience. And the topic of our today's discussion, this is the issue of realpolitik and the question which you asked relating to how Azerbaijan navigate in these circumstances. But I believe that in order to address this issue and in order to, let's say, to provide view in respect of this, first of all, probably we need to have an answer that what kind of, before, let's say, real political issue, what kind of world order we are operating in. Because many experts and specialists, they call the real situation which we are observing in the world as a polycrisis. And I think that this word very clearly shows the scope of diversity and multiple challenges which we face. Unfortunately, what we see that the toolbox which was created many decades ago in order to tackle, the global challenges was prepared in different circumstances. And when we continue to rely on the universal, let's say, organizations, the same rules and procedures, they are not good enough in current circumstances because a lot has been changed so far. First of all, these, let's say, instruments has been created by a limited number of states, again, in different era and circumstances. Another thing is that within quite recently short period of time, after these rules were created and then they was imposed to all other countries, by the implementation of double standards and selective approaches, these rules were actually discredited in certain sense by the same, let's say, states which created these rules. So it undermined, let's say, the respect and belief in these rules. But later on, what we see and observe now, of course, situation dramatically changed. And there are a number of factors which today we cannot ignore and have to take into account. First, today's world is significantly more complicated, not only by the number of countries, which today is approximately 4 times more than when this world order has been created after the World War II, but in real life, I think that there is a significant increase in the countries which implement real sovereign policy. Another thing is that today there is a growing number of middle powers which has their own interests. There are strong regional actors whose interest has to be taken into account. And this is, let's say, new changes and new dynamics which one should take into account. Another, let's say, new element which we today observe, this is increased dynamism in international relations. And in order to tackle this type of, let's say, issues, your instruments has to be similar. Because the very simple example, when we talk about interstate, let's say, problems, interstate, let's say, disputes, and even if, let's say, these states, they agree and they want to address this in a very civilized way, the time for, let's say, dispute resolutions, it in average between 5 to 10 years. Simply, we do not have this time in real, world in today's circumstances. I think another huge challenge which we have is that all the rules, let's say, instruments, toolbox, as we say, they were created, if you wish, for classical challenges, which at that time predominantly was considered as wars, conflicts between the states. And when we see today's global challenges, there are, let's say, much more. And from this perspective, we can have a look at a couple of examples. And I think that the COVID, for instance, was a good eye-opener for the world when I think that the universe globally, the human, as a global community, we failed both preparation and also reaction when big number of countries and the whole regions were neglected. When we saw the negative effect of protectionism, vaccine nationalism, etc., etc. We are today talking, and this is everyone today accept, that the climate issue is probably the most serious challenge for the universe, and at the same time there is a huge gap in approach. How to tackle the problem, what should be our, let's say, combined approach, and we still have again the huge disagreements in respect of this as a global community. And taking into consideration, let's say, the negative experience from these new global challenges, there is no enough optimism that in a very short period of time we will agree about our combined action and reaction to artificial intelligence, which is, another challenge which everyone today accepts in comparison with the previous. Probably this is the latest one and probably not the last one. So I think that when we talk about the realpolitik, probably here the right approach should be that every country should approach from one's national interest, but the approach should not be with the philosophy of zero-sum game. Because only taking into consideration also the interest of other parties, of other players, you can agree, you can reach the solution which will be sustainable. In the situation, and I can tell you that probably this is one of the, if you wish, secret of Azerbaijani approach, when there are global challenges and the global, let's say, universal instruments are not good enough, we believe that first thing which we need to focus, and this is quite natural even also for human being, this is to start cooperation with your neighbors. And here we believe that the regional approach is extremely important, because when you can and write, let's say, regional cooperation, can tackle the problems and can have good operational solutions. And then gradually you can expand this, and then the bigger, let's say, alliances can, deal and can give positive results. So we are very proud is that also being not a big country, but long, time already, we transformed from recipient to donor of not only regional, but in certain sense, donor to global security, to global stability, to global development. I think that during the continuation of our, discussions, I will be happy also to talk about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. What you said echoed very much with some parts of the discussion of the previous session, and then the very title of the forum as well, Fractured World and How to Fix It. And one takeaway that is quite clear is that while it is necessary to identify the gaps and understand the shortcomings of the system, which is slow to adapt to the new realities of the world, one must take action in between, and then to see how solutions can be found at the local, regional, and then global level if it becomes a springboard for that. And regional initiatives here in the Caucasus with the energy corridors that by many have been branded very local and regional initiative from outside of the region have become a lifeline for many now in Europe as well when it comes to the supplies of the energy at the time of the crisis. So action rather than just talk about how the solutions could be found. I'll switch to Mr. It's funny that myself with last name Tkeshelashvili can be having hard time with pronunciation of the last names, but Mr. Dugan, right, or Dugan? Yeah. So part of what would be our remarkable experience, the issues that are very much relevant to what we're considering now at this panel discussion, including threats that are coming from non-state actors, I would imagine, and then asymmetric sort of security-related threats. Would be very good to hear from you as well as part of your intervention, how you see if indeed realpolitik is becoming more accepted as a dominant factor of the foreign policy. Are we facing a challenge of jeopardizing all of what we've cherished before in terms of development, principles of international law, common order, rules-based international relations, and common efforts at a global level that we could trust? Please, the floor is yours. You would prefer?
Thank you very much. Excellencies, dear friends and colleagues, I thank our gracious hosts for the privilege to participate with you in this significant forum. Regarding this panel's topic of international cooperation, among us are many distinguished former presidents of the United Nations General Assembly. For your information, they organized recently into a council in 2022 and now meet routinely as a brain trust of advice and wisdom for ongoing reform of the Assembly and strengthening the office of the President. The current UN General Assembly President, Dennis Francis, will address us here tomorrow morning. Now, my duty today is to refresh us on what is realpolitik, idealism, and the rule-based international order. First, realpolitik. Realpolitik views states as operating in a competitive world where power and influence drive their action. Idealism, in turn, believes that true world harmony depends upon the elaboration of universal values through international cooperation. And what of the rules-based international order? My main point today is that whether driven by realpolitik or idealism, the rules-based international order must always be liberal. The correct and full phrase is rules-based liberal international order. Now, what does the word liberal add? Liberal means that the rules evolve through custom, practice, and agreement of willing sovereigns. So let's not let the word liberal slip, lest it be replaced with the word authoritarian, as in a rules-based authoritarian international order. That deploys coercion and undermines sovereignty. No, a rules-based authoritarian international order does not roll well off of the tongue. Now back to realpolitik and idealism briefly. Many regard the surges of national conservatism in many capitals now as a threat to enlightened governance. Idealists believe that this populism leads to a resurgence of the realpolitik worldview in foreign relations. To them, realpolitik is a trap into a more deeply fractured world, a world exposed to lurking authoritarian remedies. Their preference is that interstate tensions be tamed through shared idealism of international cooperation through multilateral machinery. What realists believe is that a strong state is foremost needed for offsetting global forces. States, only after settling on a pecking order, might be inclined to deploy multilateral mechanisms, but only for maintaining balance of power among themselves. Now, whatever their preference, idealism or realism, all peoples agree that states are inviolable. But states inevitably bump into each other. Why? because they are among each other in a world getting smaller and smaller. This constrains each state's scope of action. Indeed, while each state is sovereign, the bumpy, day-to-day international system can barely tolerate that sovereignty. But somehow it does. How? Let's look at this from a road traffic perspective. When entering a roundabout, each car has the right of way. But more traffic leads to accidents. Routinely opting to yield the right of way makes sense, so that all might make it home alive. And it all happens without signs, stoplights, or traffic cops. And in the end, let's face it, it does no harm to one's pride or sovereignty. But note the phrase I used, yielding the right of way, does not mean surrendering or losing the right of way. Yielding is a decision taken in enlightened self-interest. Similarly, states yield their sovereignty from time to time. Such enlightened self-interest in practice and in custom and in agreement is what we have come to know as the rules-based liberal international order, in which states yield sensibly to foreign constraints while finding openings for further cooperative advantage. So clearly, the rules-based liberal international order has been evolving and is with us. Of course, we must always voice our concerns at even the hint of possible collisions in that roundabout. But while the order may not always be honored or at times appear fractured, it can withstand most any setback and usefully learn from it. So please let me reiterate my takeaway point today. The rules-based international order must be liberal. The correct phrase is rules-based liberal international order. It means that rules emerge by practice, custom, and agreement of willing sovereign parties. Let us not fall into the habit of dropping that word. Why? Because a rules-based authoritarian international order is currently much more of a risk in the making than is either realpolitik power play or wistful idealism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. A clear message that it's not just the rules or abiding by the rules that matters, but what are the underpinning principles and values that actually form the foundation of those rules that make them a driving force and a guidance for the future. President Zatlers, I want to pose to you a bit of a tricky question. We talk about comeback of realpolitik, but coming from Latvia as a member of the European Union and NATO now, but then the painful past of being part of the Soviet Union as well and the occupation at that time, how do you see, is all the buzz about comeback of realpolitik is more of a change of narrative because it never really left the scene? Or we experiencing something really different right now in the current times? And we frequently have heard in this part of the world when we would talk about challenges posed by Russia that realpolitik arguments back, so to say, saying that, you know, what we can do a piece here and there, and then we have to consider the interests of Russia. It sounded quite much as a realpolitik type of the policy vis-a-vis Russia in so many ways. And yet again, we are now in 2024 already, where it's the third year when the full-fledged invasion of Ukraine is going on from the Russian side. Could you consider it as a major failure of what realpolitik stands for in terms of being efficient or effective in terms of advancing national or international interests?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think that first we have to ask the question, is the realpolitik a bad or a good word? Because the understanding of this term is very different. And also ask the question, is realpolitik having resurgence or it has been with us all the time? My answer is that it has been with us all the time in different forms and let's say different implementations. If you look back to the the years when Willy Brandt, the Chancellor of the West Germany, announced the Realpolitik as his Ostpolitik, it was a very smart and very successful policy. Because offering the rival long-term economic contracts, creating economic interdependency, reducing the tensions between, let's say, West Germany and Soviet Union was with a very good outcome. Why it was so? Because that was in the period of Cold War and bipolar world. So, and offering, economic cooperation to the, let's say, other pole, which I mean Soviet Union, was a very brave, smart, and effective policy. What happened later? The Realpolitik of West Germany was turned into Ostpolitik of United Germany. And this is absolutely a different story, because even the German politicians acknowledge that Ostpolitik or Eastern politic of Germany has failed, because it was not going to work in a monopolar world and neither in a multipolar world, and neither in the situation where we have the world without any rules. That means, success and afterwards failure, because the circumstances around, let's say, Europe has been changed. Do we have Realpolitik today? Yes, absolutely. We do have Realpolitik of today. But I will say that we have unilateral or one-sided Realpolitik. The best example is Russia. So Realpolitik is always based on economic, military, and political realities. Therefore, it's called Realpolitik. But these realities are used just for one country's interests. So they are creating the allies with Northern Korea. They are creating an alliance also with Iran, So they use the real situation only in their interests. And yesterday I was listening to President Putin's, let's say, speech or interview before elections, and I was really disappointed because there was only a message: we are ready for the chicken game, and we are ready for nuclear war, and we are not going to change. And this is the Realpolitik, which is going to fail. Sooner or later, unilateral or one-sided Realpolitik is going to change. What is the opposite? I would call it a balanced Realpolitik. Because balanced Realpolitik is not based only on realities around definite country, but also based on some moral responsibilities. It's very important. And I would say the best example here is Azerbaijan. Having neighbors as Russia, Iran, Turkey, and Armenia, okay, the relations are improving, then again, not so good, but then are becoming better. But these balanced policies based on realities led to success. And we have to understand that this example must be, used in other places in the world. On the question, do we need Realpolitik today? My answer is absolutely yes. But this balanced type one. Because where is the problem? When yesterday I was listening to the discussion about the Middle East, then I understood one thing. The question is, are we able to recognize all realities of definite region or definite place? And my answer is no. Somebody has from one angle, somebody has another angle, but we don't have this complex, balanced approach. And therefore, also we understand that without complex understanding from different angles, where is the problem and what are the real realities, We will not be able to solve any problem. And we must add responsibility to that point. Because, I mentioned again, the Soviet Union was very responsible about global affairs. Okay, in their own way, in a communist way, but there was responsibility. Today's Russia is not responsible anymore, not at all. And if you look at why, because even the Soviet Union had a democracy only of 16 people of Politburo, or as the leading elite of elites. They had democracy, they were discussing before making decision. And there was a very interesting, let's say, approach. The boss of the Communist Party coming to television said, we have discussed and decided. You will not see this today, no discussions. You don't see. And when look at again at the interview of Putin, he was so scared to make any mistake in his interview. And that means he is not, let's say, self-confident about what's going on, and he has no advisors. Or let's say he has not this, at least, very close democratic body to discuss what to do on that. How much time I do have?
We have very little. We have now 39 minutes left for four more speakers.
Okay. Okay, it's about describing the situation we have and describing the term realpolitik. But what we have to do, and we have to start talking about arms control and disarmament. And again, during the Cold War, you know, there was a lot of talks about arms control and even reduction of the strategic arms. Today, we are not talking about that. We are talking about the new arms race. And it really surprised me. In 2009, President of the United States, Obama, in his Prague speech, offered initiative of nuclear disarmament. And some people say, oh, it's impossible. Yes, because nobody was, you know, supporting him. Nobody. No reaction from anybody. So, but we have to start talking about this topic in our forums, but we have to force the nuclear powers to start talking to each other. And we should force the military powers to talk to each other how to create a peaceful environment, a legally based and legally binding peaceful environment. This is our task of this forum and the whole global community today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Zatlers. That world seems so far away right now when disarmament was part of a discourse. And especially if you look now what happens in Ukraine, country that gave up nuclear armament and then all the arsenal and then got the commitment and paper called Budapest Memorandum. We see what happens then. So not a big stimulus for any disarmament sort of movement, I guess, to invigorate talks in that direction. Now, Prime Minister Yildirim, the floor will be yours, and then I want to highlight from my end as well that Turkey is in a very unique position in so many ways, not being in between, but being part of Europe, Asia, Middle East, and then being country with the gravitas as you have, being part of NATO, but then discourses and then organizations that are cross-regional in so many ways. How do you see, what are we experiencing now? Do we see a real comeback of realpolitik in any different way? And what it takes for us to put up more effort in a cooperative mode rather than be in the middle of global power struggles, so to say, that we think that we are.
Madam Chair, distinguished speakers, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, as you well mentioned, Turkey is a unique position in terms of surrounded geography. One side in Europe, other side is Caucasia and Central Asia, and the South, Middle East. So this is gives us opportunity together with a lot of risk as well. So our geography maintain bridges between West and East, which is culture and civilizations meets and fight at the same time. So the Baku Global Forum, which has turned 11 this year and proved to be a global brand with distinguished speakers and participants. The topic of panel is very timely. The fine line between war and peace is fading away while power-based realpolitik is increasingly dominating the rule-based international system. On the one side, large-scale frontline battle reminding the First World War, but this time with a nuclear threat hanging on somewhere in the spectrum. On the other side, increasing asymmetric war through proxy organization, conflict triggering one another in different regions. Currently, rule-based international system remaining short of preventing and responding these wars. At the same time, new opportunities for lasting and comprehensive peace emerging at reach, particularly in South Caucasus. As you well know, we built a railway connection between Turkey, Tbilisi and Kars railway, which is part of Silk Way. Now, this is a realpolitik. Instead of fighting, we aim to increase cooperation, but not competition. Cooperation will provide wealth, security, and also stability in the region, whole in the globe. As all you may aware, majority of these wars nowadays has been in Türkiye's close neighborhood. As probably known by other panelists from the region, Türkiye was directly affected by the war in Syria, Iraq, Ukraine, Russia, and others. As a result of this, Türkiye is one of the countries which hosting highest number of refugees in the world. Unfortunately, we see some of our friends and allies on the same side with the terrorist organization which we are fighting over 40 years. This is sad. Currently, as we all witness, so-called rule-based international system remain insufficient to stop this endless warfare, particularly in Syria, Yemen, Libya, Ukraine, recently in Gaza. The collapse of international system is the best displayed in Gaza. World is witnessing the ethnic cleansing of Israel. The rule-based international system had nothing to do with many children, women are being killed, and humanity dying every day out there. UN Security Council has been paralyzed due to its inherent flaws and failed to live up to its basic responsibilities against endless massacres. Dear participants, in the absence of trust in the current international order, Realpolitik dictates a foreign policy that is strong on the ground as well as at the table. In this setting, we are compelled to ensure necessary measures against the threat to our national security. I am pleased to say we reached a level of defense industry with the first flight of our fifth-generation warplane last month. The aim is not to encourage the war, but to maintain the peace by increasing deterrence. Beyond national borders, ultimate aim is to create a belt of lasting peace and security and welfare in our neighbors. How to translate this into action in the word realpolitik? I have a couple of suggestions. First, we need to promote dialogue and diplomacy among the countries at conflicting areas, strengthening international institutions, addressing economic inequality among the within country and among the countries, combating climate change, supporting human rights and democracy, encouraging cultural and educational exchange, investing in conflict prevention and peace-building activities, embracing technology for good, strengthening global health system, fostering economic cooperation. These are some of topics need to be detailed work by international organizations and institutions like Baku Global Forum, Antalya Diplomacy Forum. Well, Syria was at the edge of breaking apart. As you may aware, Daesh, PKK, PYD, PGG, terrorist organizations were taking stronghold. Turkey, as the only NATO ally, fighting against Daesh on the ground, and we prevented the breakup of Syria, turned into little terror states. Distinguished participant, Azerbaijan also was suffering 30 years long occupation of Karabakh, and we proved our solidarity with Azerbaijan as one people, two states, to end this illegal operation and reinstate its territorial integrity. Now there is a window for opportunity, lasting peace, stability, welfare is open in the Caucasus region. And I believe that we are so close to peace in South Caucasus more than ever, as taking Karabakh as an example of peace. Do you have time? Okay, I will summarize. Another important event in our region is the war between Russia and Ukraine, as we also was too close to reach peace by making negotiation in Istanbul. But unfortunately, with the attempt of some other countries, it didn't work. This is very sad. While doing so, we tried to eliminate the global damage of war through brokering the Black Sea Grain Initiative, prevent global food crisis. At the end, we are ready for hosting peace summit with presence of Russia, as stated by our President Erdogan to President Zelensky visiting Turkey last Friday. In fact, Turkey has the ability to talk openly with both parties, has been an asset for peace. This is the merit of diplomacy. So, last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, keeping in mind that the worst peace is much better than any kind of war. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's quite clear that only with a sense of responsibility and attempt to seek for common good, one can overcome the zero-sum game that is imposed so many times on all of us. And Turkey played a remarkable role in avoiding the food crisis of a kind that could have been much bigger in its scale and depth during the war. And that has been, I would say with confidence, felt with great appreciation by so many that have benefited from that. We have a perfect segue to two esteemed speakers that represented UN General Assembly in different sessions. So you won't be spared by not having a question related to how UN and international organizations fit into that directly. So Mr. Kavan, I'll start with you first. How do you see listening to your fellow members of the panel and then all the discourse and the discussions around current geopolitical context, where UN fits into all of that? Do we still have trust in the charter, in principles and ability of the UN to pick up the platter and then play the role that it's supposed to do?
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I think that all of us here could agree that the world is at certain crossroads. If I refer to the terminology used by Mr. Duncan earlier, we are witnessing a permanent tension between the realpolitik and the idealist. I confess that my sympathy lies more with the idealist, despite the fact that I'm well aware that the realpolitik supporters are now prevailing. The hopes expressed after the Second World War in the UN Charter, the well-known quote, "We shall save succeeding generations from the scourge of war," but even more importantly, a few lines later, it says, "We shall establish conditions under which peace and justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained." Unfortunately, these hopes have been to a large extent shattered. We witness a kind of globalization of conflict. War is waged across different fronts. For example, as we all know, Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, Sudan, the Sahel region, the Yemen, and elsewhere. I believe that these conflicts are interconnected because the involvement of the great powers in different conflicts is part of a kind of a hybrid war. I confess that I am a great supporter of the United Nations and its charter, so I have to acknowledge that the United States' first African-American diplomat, Ralph Bunche, had a very good point when, during the drafting conference in 1945, he confided in his diary, let me quote, "There is practically no inspiration here. Every nation is dead set on looking out for its national self-interest." End of quote. Unfortunately, I think that these words are still very topical today. I would even say that the situation is worse today because the UN Security Council, with its great powers, no longer, as we all know, reflects the current international reality. At this conference, as was mentioned by Madam Moderator, and as we know in the previous panel, there were two colleagues of mine, and the next speaker, we are all former presidents of the United Nations General Assembly. And thus we all have the experience of a certain futility and powerlessness of our attempts to find a consensus how to reform the Security Council. We all agreed that the Security Council has to be geographically more representative, that there should be representation from Africa, Latin America, and Asia, etc. But when it comes to concrete countries, we face major obstacles. The obvious candidates and members of the so-called coffee club do not see the problem in exactly the same way. During my own presidency, we were able to agree after many months, I think about 6 months or seven months of negotiations, we've agreed on what was then called landmark UN resolution on the prevention of armed conflict. We have agreed on the need to enhance the role of the UN, to strengthen the role of the General Assembly so that it could resemble to a certain extent a world's parliament. We have agreed that the right of veto has to be curtailed so that it can be used only under certain clearly defined and agreed upon conditions. We have agreed that successful preventive strategies should include things like accountability and good government, respect for human rights, promotion of social and economic development, as well as programs aimed at disarmament, education, and gender equality. The resolution included many very carefully negotiated paragraphs in the context of the prevention of armed conflict. In fact, we then published a book was 382 pages, just transcripts of the most important partial resolutions and discussions concerning this one single important prevention of armed conflict resolution. I hoped at that time that it would be at least partially observed, that it would become a useful tool in the prevention of armed conflict. However, as we all know, today we witness the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is undoubtedly a violation of international law. We witness violation of the rights of national minorities elsewhere in eastern Ukraine and elsewhere. We witness the occupation of the West Bank and equally illegal establishment of the settlements in the West Bank. We have witnessed the despicable terrorist attack by Hamas against Israeli communities on October 7, which of course was preceded by frustration of decades of suppression of Palestinian rights. We do witness the terrible consequences of neglected poverty in Sudan and elsewhere, and we witness the rise of religious wars and intolerance and so on. I do not have time here to list all the blatant violations of the principles we have outlined in the UN Prevention of Armed Conflict in 2003, but it is obvious that international law is being flouted, and that there is again an urgent need to reform the UN and other international institutions which are today paralyzed by great power rivalries. We need to be able to promote dialogue, diplomatic means, to implement ceasefires, to reduce international tensions, and to set up new architecture for peace and security. The current Realpolitik is understandable in the light of the state's determination to pursue their national interest, especially the ones with the greatest decision-making power. But I believe we need to mobilize other governments, but also civil society organizations, peace movements, and other powerful NGOs in much greater effort to uphold the principles on which the United Nations was constructed. The efforts of the International Court of Justice, which heard the case brought by South Africa, was praiseworthy, in my opinion. But its future conclusions would never be fully implemented if the international community would not have the means to enforce them. And that I have my doubts.
Mr. Kavan, we are running out of time. If I could ask you to summarize.
Okay, all right. We're witnessing today paradoxical situations when, for example, the United States is doing a very good job in dropping food and aid on the starving Gazans, but at the same time, it supplies Israel with bombs which are dropped on the same people. There are many other similar paradoxical situations, and obviously I have no time to go into that. What I do believe is that we have to mobilize ourselves to pursue the possibility of a ceasefire, which will then create a space for diplomats to come in, to replace the generals and discuss a negotiated compromise which would lead to a lasting peace. I am convinced that this is a most urgent requirement today, and I've been recently with a number of colleagues, both in governments and in opposition, discussing blueprints, suggestions, how certain ceasefires, both in the Middle East and in Ukraine, could be achieved. But at the moment, there is no time to go into it. Nevertheless, I'll be happy to circulate later maybe some proposals which are now being currently discussed in my part of the world, in particular between the Czechs and the Slovaks. And I refer again, I think Mr. Duncan mentioned here the forthcoming meeting of the United Nations CPGA, and I do believe that we shall meet soon in Doha, and I greatly appreciate the mediation efforts of the Qatar government, and I believe that platforms like that should be used to discuss, prepare, and lay down framework for the necessary reform of the UN and other international institutions so that there will be possibility for peace to prevail. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Minister Jeremic, you've been in this discourse for a long time, and then your session is 67th that you presided upon after 57th that your predecessor as a speaker did. So how do you see, if you can be candid about it, do you see that anything has evolved after that, or we are talking in the same circle about reform that be or agility that is needed? What's your take on all of that? Do we have chance to make it better?
Well, thank you, Eka, for this most thoughtful question and for your masterful conducting of this panel. President Cvijanovic, Minister Bayramov, distinguished panelists and guests, it's my great pleasure, first I have to say, to be back in Baku in Azerbaijan after visiting many times, but this is the first time after the decisive resolving of this country's challenge to its territorial integrity. And at a time when I was visiting in my previous capacities, including President of the General Assembly, there was a clear and present challenge to this country's territorial integrity, which I always felt very sympathetic about, given that my country is also challenged in a similar way. When it comes to the UN and this constant questioning of how can we go about reform and even more often criticizing the United Nations for not doing more under the circumstances, my personal opinion is that it's not a fair criticism. The United Nations is a club, and the club is in a condition that the members of the club want it to be. And of course, the more powerful and the more influential the members, the more responsibility for the good maintenance of the club. One diplomat famously said once that criticizing the United Nations for the poor performance in the world, it's like criticizing the management of the Madison Square Garden for the poor performance of the New York Knicks. It's not the UN's fault. It is the member states' fault. And since the topic of this panel is Realpolitik, and whether are we witnessing the return of Realpolitik, I would dare agree with President Zatlers that it's not really the return of the Realpolitik. The Realpolitik has always been with us. It meant different things at different times. And I can tell you what Realpolitik was like in the 1990s if you were living in the former Yugoslavia, in particular Serbia. The Realpolitik was that you could actually end up being bombed without the Security Council resolution, and part of your country can be forcefully attempted to be taken away from you, despite the fact that it clearly violates international law. That was the Realpolitik of what some people would probably call the good old times. The Realpolitik of this moment is something different. What is different is that now the monopoly on the use of force is being seriously challenged. 20 years ago, there was a monopoly on the use of force. It was the Western-led alliance. Now it is being challenged, and very dramatically so, in Ukraine in particular. We have a situation which is a dramatic challenge to what we'd like to call the rules-based order, and this is what is happening in Gaza. That is the Realpolitik of the moment. So, given that we spoke earlier today about the summit of the future, and I'm very enthusiastic about the future of the United Nations because I personally believe that we have no alternative to the United Nations. The summit of the future is a clarion call to humanity to try and get things fixed or start getting things fixed. I am afraid that, for better or for worse, the current trajectory that is leading us to the summit of the future is that the second pillar of the summit for the future, which is the war and peace, and also the topic of this panel, and by the way, a book also that I recommend highly to everybody to read, especially if one wants to understand more about the wars in Eastern Europe. But in September, the Realpolitik may very well be that the war in Ukraine is essentially over, that the war in the Middle East is by all means not, and that there's an overwhelming chance that Donald Trump becomes president of the United States. Those are the three, I'd say, realities that one would want to consider as one prepares for the summit for the future, the main pillar of which is the war and peace. And therefore, I appeal that in preparation for the summit for the future, urgent priority is given to the war and peace in Gaza, in Ukraine, so that we can seriously consider the future of the United Nations in September. And there, I think, the role of the United States is going to be absolutely decisive, because the United States is the only international actor who at this moment holds the key to potential ceasefire leading to peace in both Gaza and Ukraine. And if it doesn't use it, then I fear that its capacity to influence the summit of the future is going to be seriously diminished. So I'd love to discuss more, but I understand we don't have that much time.
Thank you. I really pity that we have limited time and there's so much that we could have followed up individually and collectively during the panel discussion. But Natalie, he opened up perfectly the flow for you. United States and its role, and it's frequently mentioned, but then we see there is a revival of European Union, and then in many ways NATO as well. So we see that members of the Union are ready to pick up more when it comes to what they are responsible for, when it comes to collective security, at least in the continent in this case. Is Europe ready for that or not? Remains to be seen. France is an influential member not only in the EU, but has a special mandate and gravitas at the UN as well. So how do you see that both France as a member of Europe, but then a permanent member of the Security Council, navigates these waters right now? How do you see that you are performing at the level that you need to?
Thank you for this question. First, I want to thank the Nizami Ganjavi Center for this invitation, and especially Roshan Muradov and all his team for this nice invitation. Well, being French in Baku today is very challenging. Let me tell you something. First, I want to say just a word about international community. Well, it's somehow the failure of SCE for more than 24 years in the Minsk group that creates this commotion by keeping this occupation for so many time. And believe me or not, I'm not very optimistic. And so the Realpolitik is what it is today. But we have a failure of international community. We cannot always tell fortune teller and the future between gypsy. We have to tell the reality. And the reality is that the international community is not working as well as it should be. So I think that countries are exactly like people, more and more selfish, more focus on their own purpose and their own needs. And they don't want to share. It's as simple as that. And short view without a global perspective. It's exactly what happened today. Realpolitik is also under very strong lobbies. And as I told you, being French in Baku is also having on my back a very toxic lobby in my country, which is not too easy to carry and to deal with. But it's also that Realpolitik in France is just to give up in front of some lobbies, and especially Armenian one. Realpolitik is also missing a leadership. The situation today is that the world is missing leadership. We don't have leadership. And I was listening to the young leader in this forum, and I think that the leadership is very important, is almost instrumental for the politik. And because we are missing this leadership, we are also missing the right things to do. So without leadership, you also lost your sovereignty. By the way, you also have self-censorship because of this Realpolitik. So lack of leadership, new global challenge, asymmetric war, because the war is not what it was 20 years ago, cyber criminality, terrorism, which are asymmetric and don't answer to the right situation. We were not prepared to this massive terrorism. And we need a leadership for that. And I would like to tell you that with this media as a massive destruction weapon, we also have to face a new challenge. And I would like you to report to the last report of OCDE on the real information and what it means for the reality, for the peace and stability. So, raising of extremism too, we also have to face that. And all that together with selfishness, you are back to Realpolitik. And as I told you, I'm not very optimistic. And back to that, I think that civil society may have a role. This kind of forum and center also have its role. France and Europe will have its own, but in this frame, is this, in this frame and not anything else. And back to the leadership, I would like also to emphasize that I think that conviction has to be back. We have not to give up to our conviction. And believe me or not, I know exactly what I'm talking about as being French, friend of Azerbaijan, in French right now regarding the global situation. You have not to give up to your conviction. And I just want to have a last word. I heard a lot of things on Gaza, and I would like to share with you my deep and dramatic conviction. We have to free Israeli hostage now. And I would like this forum to support this mention very, very strongly. That is my strong conviction. That is very important. That is also realpolitik, but it's also the life of the people. Thank you.
Run out of time, but it couldn't have been a better ending to this session when it comes to conviction that we can make it, and then what are the difficult but necessary decisions that have to be made. And all I can say, with having no time and then no, unfortunately, opportunity for my excellent speakers to have final remarks on the end, is that at the end of the day, we are not facing anything dramatically different. World has been complicated all along. There are no excuses for inaction. We just need to roll up our sleeves and then get to work and then see how we can fix and find the solutions. And I regret that we didn't have time for any question from young leaders to be posed this time around at this panel, but that's again a reference to us as well, that we need to open up space for younger generation to be already part of decision-making processes, being part of the resolution, and then that's exactly fastness and agility, perhaps, Minister, that we are seeking, that we need to inject in the current world of decision-making and international institutions as well. I thank you for your attention. I'm sorry for the speakers for not having more time for you to expand on the issues that you wanted to touch, and thank you very much. And please, a round of applause for our speakers.